Welcome, and thanks for joining us for the Rock Solid Apologia podcast, where we discuss Christian apologetics, worldviews, and so much more. We're so glad that you're listening with us today. Feel free to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to keep up with all the latest news over at RSA. Now, on to today's podcast episode.
Welcome to the world's one and only apologetic satire podcast. I'm Will England, editor-in-chief of Rock Solid Apologia, and joining us today is Dr. Hugh Ross. Astrophysicist Hugh Ross is the founder, senior scholar, and former president of Reasons to Believe, holds a degree in physics from the University of British Columbia, and a PhD in astronomy from the University of Toronto. His books include Why the Universe is the Way It Is, Improbable Planet, and Design to the Core. Hugh has spoken on hundreds of university campuses, as well as at conferences and churches around the world. Welcome to the world's one and only apologetic satire podcast, Dr. Ross. It's terrific to have you.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
So give us a little bit of your background. Tell us a little bit about Reasons to Believe and where we can find more of you.
Well, I was born, raised, and educated in Canada. I was one of these nerdy kids. I committed to studying astronomy and physics when I was 7 years of age, reading 4 or 5 books on physics and astronomy a week. Didn't know any Christians. They're hard to find in Canada. But it was my studies in astronomy that convinced me the universe had a beginning. And if it's got a beginning, there has to be a cosmic beginner. So I spent 2 years on a search trying to find that cosmic beginner. Had no idea where to look. I kind of started by looking at the great philosophers, read Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. I wasn't getting very far there, so I began to dive into the world's holy books, and it was a 19-month study of a Gideon Bible that brought me to faith in Jesus Christ, recognizing that this book, the Bible, is the only book we have from ancient times that accurately predicts hundreds of future scientific discoveries. So that's how I became convinced. It was the word from the one that created the universe and signed my name on the back of that Gideon Bible, giving my life to Christ.
When did you found Reasons to Believe? As I believe you're the founder of that.
Right. Well, I went on to get my PhD in astrophysics. I went to Caltech, and it's at Caltech that I met serious Christians for the first time. They helped me to find a church. It's a church between Caltech, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the headquarters of the Skeptic Society. So I was training people there how to use science to bring people to faith in Jesus Christ. And it was that church that helped me found Reasons to Believe 39 years ago, with the mission to reach people in the STEM professions for faith in Jesus Christ here in America and around the world.
Well, we'll put a link to Reasons to Believe in the description of this interview. I wanted to talk specifically about your one book, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men, a terrific title. Start pretty broad. In your view, there's 2 questions here. Is there extraterrestrial life? And then more specific, is there intelligent extraterrestrial life?
Sure. And my study in UFOs and UAPs began when I was 16, before I was a Christian, when they put our astronomy club booth right next to the Flying Saucer Club. So everywhere I went, they made me the one that had to process all the UFO reports. But your larger question is interesting. What about extraterrestrial life? And Christians have been debating that issue for 2,000 years. I mean, there are Christians who look at the creation accounts, especially Psalm 104, and it's like God has so much joy in creating. Why would he stop at one planet? He must have created life on multiple planets throughout the universe. But then there's another team of Christian scholars that say, when you read the New Testament Gospels, it seems to reveal a God who's conservative about his miracles. In other words, he performs as few miracles as are needed to achieve his ultimate purposes, and they argue that God would only need to create life on one planet to fulfill his purpose of eradicating evil and suffering from his creation. So Christians have been on both sides of the fence for 2,000 years. Astronomers are now weighing in their search for extraterrestrial life, and they've basically concluded that everywhere we look in the universe, we see extremely hostile conditions for advanced life outside of planet Earth. So it really does look like we're alone. And this is what's called the rare Earth hypothesis. But there are a number of astronomers who believe that we may be able to find a planet or a moon on which we have microbes existing for a short period of time. So there's still some limited optimism that we might find life at that level. And I've been on record since the 1980s. We will find the remains of life on every solar system body for the simple reason every time asteroids or comets strike the Earth, Earth microbes get exported throughout the solar system. In fact, friends of mine have calculated that on the moon, there's 20,000 kilograms of Earth soil for every 100 square kilometers. And 1 ton of Earth soil has 100 quadrillion microbes in it. So I've actually been recommending since 2007, let's go back to the moon with a different mission to recover the fossils of Earth's first life and see who got the origin of life model right, the theists or the atheists. And the last time I checked, atheists and theists made up 100% of the US taxpayer base. So I think everybody should be motivated. Let's go to the moon and see who got it right.
So going back to the moon could confirm the intelligent design hypothesis?
Well, the Earth's geology is so active, it's destroyed the fossils of Earth's first life. We'll never find the fossils of Earth's first life on the Earth. But the moon has very little geological activity. And so the moon is where we're going to find the fossils of Earth's first life. And there's been a major debate running for decades about what those fossils will look like. Going to the moon, we can settle that. We could also do it on Mars, but on Mars, you only have 200 kilograms of Earth soil for every 100 square kilometers. It'd be much easier and a lot less money to do it on the moon.
So generally, the astronomers would lean against intelligent extraterrestrial life, aliens, that kind of thing. The evidence would lean against it.
Yeah, the evidence heavily leans against the existence of extraterrestrial intelligent life. As I say, there are some astronomers that think there could be microbes based on their model, the origin of life. I happen to believe that the origin of life requires miraculous intervention, but there are biochemists who think that it might happen naturalistically, and therefore they hold out hope that there could be planets where microbes exist, at least for a short period of time. I'm personally a skeptic of that point of view because looking at the experiments that have been done in the laboratories where we're trying to simulate some of the pathways for the origin of life, you only make progress if the biochemist intervenes in a very significant, intelligent way in the experiment, basically demonstrating somebody a lot more intelligent and knowledgeable and better funded must have created life on planet Earth in the first place.
So let's talk a little bit about the biblical record. Christians have been on both sides for a long time. Any biblical evidence to support especially intelligent life on other planets? I would not personally agree with this stance, but some people will say, like Ezekiel 1, for instance, is evidence of a flying saucer.
Well, the Bible does speak about God creating two distinct species of intelligent life, humans and angels. The difference is we humans are constrained by the physics of the universe and the dimensions of the universe. The angels are not. And non-Christians refer to these as interdimensional beings. And this is where the UFO database establishes we indeed are being visited, not by beings constrained by the physics of the universe, but by beings who are not so constrained. But there are Christians who would argue that You know, God seems to enjoy creating to such a great degree that they believe that he has created beings like us on other planets. We do know they can't visit us. It's just not possible for beings of our size to traverse interstellar space. So, for example, we astronomers actually have a proposed mission to go to the nearest planet outside the solar system. It's only 4.25 light years away, but we realize that the physics of the universe will not permit getting there with a spaceship bigger than 10 centimeters. And so the proposal is to send 1,000 spaceships no bigger than 10 centimeters, knowing that more than half of them will be completely destroyed before they get there. But the hope is that the rest of them would only be partly destroyed and we'll get back some meaningful information. But what that tells you is you can't send beings like us across interstellar space. You can't send termites across interstellar space. It would be a challenge even to send a microbe in a spaceship that small.
Let's go into the interdimensional hypothesis a little bit. And I think we should also talk a little bit about UFOs and make sure everybody's clear on what a UFO is. So maybe we'll talk about what is a UFO, strictly speaking, and then we can talk a little bit about the interdimensional hypothesis.
Well, UFO stands for Unidentified Flying Object. The new label now is UAP, which is an unidentified anomalous phenomena or aerial phenomena. And I've been processing UFO reports for decades, and about 99% of what people report to me as a UFO or a UAP has a natural explanation, or it's a hoax, or it's secret military activity. But there's a 1% residual that doesn't fall into that category. And what I've documented in Lights in the Sky, Little Green Men, we're dealing with a phenomenon that is real, but it's not physical. We can prove it's real because we've actually had cases, hundreds of cases, where the UFO is observed going through the atmosphere, crashes into the Earth. You go to the crash site, you see a shallow crater. If there's snow, the snow is melted. The vegetation is always damaged, but there's no artifacts or debris at the crash site. And when the UFO is observed going through the atmosphere at thousands of miles per hour, no sonic boom, no heat friction. If we're dealing with physical objects, there'll be debris at the site. There isn't any. And you'd get a sonic boom and you get heat friction. And so we're dealing with something that's real, but not physical, something that's outside the laws of physics, which is why the agnostic astronomer Jacques Vallée has said we're dealing with interdimensional entities. But also what I notice about the physicists who devoted a decade or more to studying this phenomena, who don't believe in God, they're all saying with consistency what we're seeing as a one-to-one correspondence with what people claim in the occult and demonology. And I would agree with that because when people have close encounters, less than 500 feet with the UFO phenomena, the encounter is always harmful, it's never beneficial. The best you come away with is recurring, terrifying nightmares. The other thing that we've documented in our book is it only happens to people who are deeply involved in the occult. Get the occult out of your life, that's the end of close encounters with UFOs.
There's a connection between, for that 1% or less than 1% that's real, there's a connection between the occult and seeing UFOs.
Well, there's certainly a connection for the ones who experience the close encounters. I mean, where you don't have a close encounter, sometimes it's difficult to tell, is this a natural phenomena, a military thing, or is it really one of these interdimensional phenomena that's going place? With the close encounters, it's easier to determine, hey, this is a real interdimensional phenomenon we're dealing with. But in that case, 100%, it's the occult.
And the other 99% is government, secret craft, or things that have a natural explanation.
Well, one of the most common things, when I talk to people who claim to have an encounter, I say, well, how dark adapted were your eyes? Because often a lot of the encounters happen within the 20 minutes that they leave a lit room and go outside at night. Well, your eyes take time to dark adapt, and you will see lights in the sky just during that. So I discount anything where the human observer is not fully dark adapted. Or, if they're inside and they see all these glowing things on the horizon, I say, well, was there a chandelier behind you? Because that will be reflected through the window to look like orbs over the horizon. So you get used to asking people the right questions. Venus is often identified as a UFO, especially when it's a bright morning star. I mean, Venus can get bright enough you can read a newspaper by it. Fireballs. I've seen fireballs as big as 4 times the diameter of the moon. And people often report those kinds of phenomena as UFOs.
So is it true? I've heard that a lot of at least in the last, say, 50 years, a lot of the experiences people describe, they keep up with whatever the trend is in science fiction. So, for instance, when science fiction depicted aliens poking us with needles, they described it with needles. And then when scans came along in human technology, you start to have scans. Is it true that the descriptions sort of follow along with science fiction?
Well, this is why I think that these beings have the motivation to deceive us. They're keeping pace with our technology. They're also keeping pace with the lay knowledge of astronomy. So, for example, 120 years ago, UFOs were appearing as slow-moving dirigibles in the atmosphere. And people who had the close encounters, they were being told, well, we're from the backside of the moon. But when the general population became aware life's not possible on the backside of the moon, they changed their story to say that they were from Venus. When people realized how hot it is on the surface of Venus, they said they're from Mars. Today, they're telling people we're from another planetary system. And instead of slow-moving dirigibles, by World War II, they were the Foo Fighters, moving at the speed of sound. And then today, these UFOs are a parent craft, moving at 25,000 miles per hour. So they seem to be keeping pace with our technology in multiple different ways. And they keep changing their story about the astronomy, where they're from and what's going on in astrophysics.
It's just interesting how much science fiction has played into this particular area.
Well, it is. And what's also interesting is even throughout the past 150 years, the lay public may have been fooled, but the astronomers knew that the astronomy was wrong. I mean, 150 years ago, astronomers knew life's not possible on the backside of the moon. But it took the general public a number of additional decades to catch up. So at least the experts knew that the information as being communicated wasn't correct.
So then I wanted to talk a little bit about UFOs, ufology in certain cults. Has UFOs, extraterrestrial life, ufology, has that made its way into cults or other religions?
Well, there are 4 major UFO religions functioning in the United States today. The biggest of those are founded on what's called the Arantia book. That's kind of the Bible of these UFO religions. And it was a book that was communicated through automatic writing, where a human had a close encounter with these UFO creatures and went into a trance. And then while they're in a trance, they basically engage in automatic writing. And this is not a small book. I mean, some editions run 4,000 pages. But what's interesting about the Arantia book, a third of its content is focused on denying the deity of Jesus Christ. So it gives you some idea of the mission of these beings to dissuade people from following the Christian faith and instead to pursue one of these UFO religions. And, in places in Europe, it's even more predominant than here in the US. I mean, when I've been to France and Soviet Russia, the number of people who had UFO encounters was 4 or 5 times higher per capita than what was the case here in the United States. But that's because during the Soviet era, a lot more people, especially their scientists and engineers, were deeply involved in the occult. That was a time when the Soviet Union was sponsoring research in occult physics. And likewise, France, the level of the occult in France is much higher than it is here in the US. I'd also say here in the United States, the incidence of UFOs per capita is much higher in Alaska and Hawaii than the other 48 states. But those are 2 states where a much larger percentage of the population is involved in the occult.
I've been listening a little bit to, this is a bit off script, but the Christian, although he denies the resurrection, as I understand it, historian Dale Allison, who talks a lot about the Marian appearances and the evidence for those. I was curious, from your perspective as an astrophysicist, what do you do with like appearances of Mary in the sky that people claim to have seen? I mean, that's not a UFO per se, but it's something people look up into the sky and say there's something there.
Well, I think some of that is natural. I mean, I was on a hiking thing where we had some freezing on rocks, and you could actually see Mary showing up there. So things like that can happen naturally. But I also think sometimes it is supernatural. And there you got to test the message. I mean, these Mary apparitions that are common in Eastern Europe, a lot of it is focused on getting people away from the biblical truth about the Gospels and the life of Mary. Often it leads to Mary worship, where they begin to think that Mary is sin-free. And what I've noticed about people who kind of put Mary in that status, they have a real fondness for the Magnificat, Mary's song when she visits Elizabeth. But in that song, she declares that she's a sinner in need of salvation. And so the Bible clearly makes the point, yes, she's to be honored among all women. We're not to demean her, but we need to realize there's only one intercessor between God and man, and that's the man Christ Jesus.
What was interesting about what he has said about it was, he was comparing the evidence for the Marian apparitions with the evidence for Jesus's resurrection, and he just pointed to the thousands of eyewitness testimonies, which I thought, I mean, obviously I disagree with it, but I mean, it was an interesting way of a skeptic going about
Well, notice what Jesus says in Matthew 7. He says the demons can perform miracles too.
Right.
So miracles are not evidence that this is God's movement. And this is why you see in the Gospel of John a recording of miracles that only God is capable of performing. But this is why the same Apostle John made the point in his first epistle. We need to test the spirits. Anytime we see a miracle, we need to put it to a test to see who's really behind it. So I'm not denying the miraculous nature of some of these Mary apparitions. I'm denying the motivation or the message that's being promoted in that context.
So let's talk about another way the aliens sometimes make their appearance. I think it was Richard Dawkins who at one point suggested that aliens or extraterrestrials may have seeded life here on Earth, as a way of getting out of, I think he was asked like, what sort of intelligent design would you be okay with? I may be misremembering that though, and that was what he said. How would that, like what's the drive behind this? And then scientifically, how does this stack up against the God hypothesis as far as an explanation for intelligent life?
Yeah, that came out of the book Expelled, and I guess the context is important. The interviewer was asking Richard Dawkins, look, I know you're an atheist, you don't believe in God, uh, but if you were forced to, come up with a hypothesis about how we get here, what would you come up with? And basically said, well, if you're going to force me, I would say extraterrestrial aliens. But he didn't like that explanation. And he's been taken out of context as actually promoting that idea. He made it very clear. Look, I don't believe in that either. But if you're going to force me into that position of saying, okay, how do you explain it? He says, well, okay, I could come up with that. I think that's better than the God hypothesis, but I don't like either hypothesis.
And like the drive would be really, it's not that this is a plausible hypothesis per se. It's just we don't like the God hypothesis. So this is if I'm forced to take a
Well,
position.
Richard Dawkins' position is that it's neither extraterrestrial aliens or God, and all
Right.
happen naturalistically without an intelligent agent. But you'll see numerous materials at reasons.org where we show that, hey, the people actually doing research on the origin of life, they know this is not working. I mean, my colleague Fazal Rana, our staff biochemist, and I, we attend origin of life research conferences. And what's interesting, every conference we attend is more depressing than the last conference because they keep running into more and more obstacles for a naturalistic explanation. And something similar to what you heard about Richard Dawkins. We were at one Origin of Life conference where at the very end of the conference, a scientist came to the microphone and said, well, during this conference on day one, we eliminated Earth as a site for a naturalistic origin of life. Day two, we eliminated Mars. Day three, we eliminated the rest of the solar system. Day four, we eliminated panspermia, the idea that microbes got to us by traveling over interstellar space. The only thing left is intelligent aliens must have come here, 3.8 billion years ago, put life here on planet Earth, and they must have come back repeatedly to explain all the mass speciation events we see in the fossil record. And it's like, okay, if you're going to go that far, why don't you give some serious attention to the real answer? There's a God beyond space and time, the same one who created the universe, who created life here on planet Earth, and was also responsible for all the mass speciation events we see in the fossil record. And, in my book, Improbable Planet, I quote numerous paleontologists and geneticists who basically make the point the more we learn about the Avalon and Cambrian explosions of life, the more impossible we realize that it has a naturalistic explanation. And they all make the point we don't like the idea of a divine being, but this is where the evidence is taking us.
This is another a bit off script question, but if you had to pick, there's a whole list of philosophical reasons for God's existence. If you had to pick your top 1 to 3, what would you put in that category of best arguments for God's existence?
Well, Paul said that the resurrection of Jesus from the dead is at the top of the list. I would agree with him, but often it's challenging to get people to listen to that evidence. They want to hear the scientific case. And what I've learned is that the best scientific argument is the fine-tuning argument for design. And that goes back all the way to Augustine. So, I mean, Christians have always seen that as the go-to scientific argument for the existence of the God of the Bible. It's why I've written 7 full-length books on the fine-tuning argument. But I think where that argument is most powerful, it was framed in the context of redemption. The Bible tells us repeatedly that God began his works of redemption before he created anything at all, which implies that everything that God creates is for the purpose of making possible the redemption of billions of human beings from their sin and evil. And in my latest fine-tuning book, Designed to the Core, I make the argument that every component of the universe and every significant event in the history of the universe plays a role in making possible the redemption of human beings from their sin and evil. And the probability of that happening without divine intervention, way less than 1 chance in 10 to the 1700th power. And what I learned as a physics undergraduate student, anytime you prove that something is less possible than 1 chance in 10 to the 50th, you basically have demonstrated it's impossible. Well, we got another 1,650 zeros beyond that.
So another rhetorical question, I think it goes on the lines of the intelligent design argument that atheists give, especially online, is like, what's the difference between God and really powerful aliens? How would you interact with that?
Well, I've written an article, a short article on our reasons.org website, basically making the point science only makes sense if you have a God that's triune, 3 persons and 1 essence. The problem with Islam and Judaism, you got 1 person, that's God. And that single person has no experience of love and no experience of expressing love. So in Christianity, we've got an answer for the origin of love. We have these 3 persons engage in a loving relationship with one another before they created anything. But the problem, say, with Hinduism and Buddhism, you got all these different gods involved in creation with different objectives. So in Hinduism, for example, their science is one, we expect the record of nature to be chaotic with lots of inconsistencies, lack of harmony. When we look at the record of nature, we see that's not the way it is. It's consistent, it's harmonious, it has the signature of having been created by someone with a single plan, a single mind, a single set of purposes. That's the doctrine of the Trinity. The other thing that distinguishes it from just brilliant aliens is the redemptive feature, how the whole universe is designed with the goal of eradicating evil and suffering and of delivering billions of human beings from their sin and evil and preparing them for future careers in the new creation. That's where Christianity stands apart. It's a 2 creation model, not a 1 creation model. God creates the first creation, the universe, to be a tool to eradicate evil. And once that happens, the universe will have fulfilled its purpose. God will replace it with a brand new realm with radically different laws of physics, radically different space-time dimensions, so that in that realm where evil can never exist, the expression of love can be exponentially expanded.
It's interesting the distinction of the Trinity, because I think that goes into the Trinity solves the age-old philosophical problem of the one of the many. But I think that's a really good differentiation, and it's not one that I've heard a lot.
Well, one thing I like about the Trinity, it was actually part of my conversion, realizing that of all the world's holy books, only the Bible describes doctrines that can't be visualized within length, width, height, and time. Notice the only religion that has the Trinity doctrine is Christianity. You can't visualize that from length, width, height, and time. So I saw that as evidence that the Bible's message came from being beyond space and time because it describes heaven and hell, God's predestination, simultaneously operating with human free will, the Trinity, and a number of other doctrines that go beyond what we human beings can visualize. And all the other holy books, I saw the limitations of human visualization. Only in the Bible did I see that it had to be a message from a being that transcends our universe.
And because Christianity, I mean, our God is the only God that's truly unique because we have this unique conception of or a unique revelation, I should say, of a triune God, rather than a polytheistic God or pure monotheism, Tawhid-like God of Islam. So going back to the UFO alien general stuff, I'm usually pretty skeptical. I thought it'd be interesting to do an interview, but I'm usually skeptical studying it too much. Do you have any cautions you'd give to Christians who are looking to go into this area?
Well, like with anything that is demonic or occult, deal with it when you're faced with it, but don't seek it out because it can easily divert you from more important ministry. And so I'm not looking to cast demons out of people, but if a demon-possessed man or woman attends one of my Bible studies, then we definitely deal with it on the spot. And I think that's a general principle. We're here on a mission to bring people to faith in Jesus Christ, and don't let the pursuit of the occult or demonology get in the way of the more significant tasks. But hey, when you're confronted with it, you got to deal with it. So when I was in the Soviet Union speaking, the scientists there more than half the time wanted me to speak on UFOs rather than the other 30 topics I was prepared to speak on, because that was their milieu. They were being faced with this on a daily basis. And so that's the principle. Hey, if you're confronted with it, deal with it, but don't seek it out.
Well, I really appreciate you being willing to come on and talk about this, because that's one of the things. I mean, I've listened a little bit. It's not something I've studied extensively. But I wanted to do like one, surface level, let's look at basics. But I'm not, unless you're confronted with it, I'm not convinced that people really should, become experts in this area.
Well, what we say in Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men is that our explanation is testable. We're basically saying, if you open the doors to the occult and pursue demonology, don't be surprised if you have close encounters with UFOs that are incredibly terrifying. Get rid of the occult in your life. That'll be the end of those encounters. And so we just tell the skeptics, hey, put our model to the test and see what you come up with.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to come on and do this. We'll put Reasons to Believe, the link in the description. I believe Designed to the Core is your most recent book.
Yeah, and they can get 3 chapters of 8 of my books at reasons.org/Ross. And there's thousands of articles you can access at reasons.org.
Okay, so we will put all those links in the description. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of the Rock Solid Apologia podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, go ahead and like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Also, go ahead and share with us in the comments how you found out about us. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Rock Solid Apologia podcast.